I'm not sure if it's going to come to fruition, but I've been thinking the past couple of months about taking a sabbatical. I'm not sure if any of the pastors of St. Clement's have had a sabbatical. It's an opportunity the diocese affords us to be able to go away to do some study, some rest, just to kind of be renewed in our priestly life. I've been a priest for 14 years, and at least according to divine mandate, you're supposed to have a Sabbath or a sabbatical every 7 years. So I should have taken 2 by now. So maybe we'll think about it in the coming year, in the spring. Pray for me about that, the discernment, if now is the right time. But anyway, just something I'm thinking about because of the questions that were sent to me through our AFA series, Ask Father Anything. This weekend I want to focus on 2 questions. The first was to do with why we gather together as a Christian people for the Sabbath on Sunday, when the 7th day would be Saturday, and the Jewish people, of course, take Saturday as the day of rest. Why do we gather together, and what is the importance of gathering together for Sabbath rest and this rest even here on the 8th day? And then the second question was about the other type of Sabbath rest the people of Israel are called to have, and that is in the celebration of a Jubilee year. And you might know that Pope Francis called for a Jubilee year, this year 2025, and these Jubilees often happen at regular intervals of years. So I want to touch on those 2 ideas, and of course the middle rest that I'm discerning in my own life, the rest of a sabbatical, which is to come after 7 years. As we think about our gathering together as a Christian people, we know it's so important that we do have this day, this moment, at least this hour, in which to step back from our lives. Because we all get busy about so many different things. We know that's the reality not just of our lives, but that's the story of creation. It's a story from which we know comes our salvation. In the very beginning of the book of Genesis, we hear about God creating, God working, God making all that is. The birds of the field, the fish of the sea, the beasts of the field, the skies, the heavens, the earth, the waters, everything that is in them. For 6 days, we hear in the book of Genesis, God did this work in creating this world in which we live. Then, of course, we know what happened on the 7th day, that God rested from all the work that he had done. And on that 7th day, we hear of God being with his people, Adam and Eve, in the Garden of Eden, walking with them in the cool of the evening. And that as we go on in the Old Testament, we hear in the book of Exodus, after the people have left slavery in Egypt, as there, God wants to deliver them to a place of rest and security in the promised land. One of the first mandates he gives to them is to keep holy the Sabbath day, to mark it as unique, that they would be set apart as a people because of this way in which they are not just working, busy, but that they were to stop, to step back, to rest as a community, and so importantly, to come to a place of rest and of worship of God on that day. As the laws and prescriptions of Israel move forward in the Old Testament, we finally come to the books of Deuteronomy and Leviticus. And in particular, in the 23rd to 25th chapter of Leviticus, we see the mandate that God gives to his people to have a Sabbath rest, what that means, how to rest, how to worship God on that day, in the 23rd chapter. The 24th then speaks about the need to have a sabbatical, the 7th year rest, in which the fields are not to be overplanted, in which they're not to reap, to sow, but they are to have a lessening of all the labor of their lives in that 7th year. And then finally, in the 25th chapter of Leviticus, the author speaks about a Jubilee year, a Jubilee that is to happen in the 7 times the 7 weeks of years, that is, after the 49th year is completed into the 50th year, this great Jubilee celebration. This is the world. This is the rhythm of life in which our Lord Jesus comes. And as he enters into this rhythm of Jewish life, there's something so valuable for us in this time of the Christian dispensation to reflect on how he entered into that rhythm. And it helps us to understand why we continue that rhythm and even how it has been adapted, changed, renewed in that Christ event that took place. With that in mind, we read today in our gospel from the second chapter of John. It's unique when we read from the Gospel of John. We only dabble in it here and there through the 3-year cycle of readings. Today, the second chapter, near the very beginning of the Gospel of John, is our reading. And many people would be familiar with the first chapter of St. John. In the beginning, just as the book of Genesis begins, so begins the Gospel of John. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them in the book of Genesis. But John says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Through him all things were made. Right? This is what we call the prologue of John. But very intentionally, John is evoking that language of the 7 days of creation, and the first day of creation in the coming of Christ and the Word that has become flesh. Now, I brought my Bible along from my chapel. It's sort of a burgundy, reddish Bible. Do you know why your Bible should be reddish? Because it should be red. You got there. I brought my Bible along and I was reading, this first chapter of John and the second chapter of John where we hear of the wedding feast at Cana. And if you want, turn to the first chapter of John with me in the Bibles in the pews if you want. Because as I just spoke about at the very start, he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. It's beautiful, this prologue as it goes on for 18 verses. And then at verse 29, John says, the next day. Interesting. Just like the book of Genesis. In the beginning, then on the second day. So verse 29 is the next day. And then we go on to verse 35, in which John says again, the next day. Now we're on maybe day 3, if we're thinking with that biblical imagery. And verse 43 tells us, the next day. We're on day 4 all of a sudden. And then day 4, or the next day, wraps up the first chapter of John. Then we begin our gospel that we heard just proclaimed, the beginning of the chapter 2, in which John says, on the 3rd day after these things took place. So we're on 4 days, and then we add 1, 2, 3. Well, all of a sudden now we realize the wedding feast of Cana is the first Sabbath that is spoken about in the Gospels. The first Sabbath in which Jesus stepped apart with his family and with his friends to celebrate this wedding. This is the first Sabbath in which Jesus' glory, his work in the midst of his people, is about to take place through this first miracle that happens of the changing of water into wine. And so in the very fabric of the Gospel of John is embedded this idea of Sabbath and this rhythm of life that was for the Jewish people so ordinary. As this story of the wedding feast at Cana unfolds, we know that what is revealed to us is that Jesus isn't a prophet like any other. That his presence there at the wedding feast at Cana, what he is able to do, the glory that is manifested through his work, is something very unique. And in fact, takes us back to that place in the Garden of Eden on the first Sabbath of all time, which God was with his people, Adam and Eve, that first couple that were made for one another, made in the image and likeness of God, male and female. It brings us back to that place in which God wanted to dwell with that couple, with that family, with that first origin of the human life and existence that we share. When we then think about why we as Christians not only celebrate a Sabbath, but that we come together on this Sunday for our day of worship, our day of rest, I think to understand that is to look at our culture that's developed and the beautiful gift that is ours in living in this time, in this space. From the very early church, there was a recognition that this Sabbath And the full renewal of all creation, the recreation of all things, was to be celebrated on Sunday, which was the day of the Lord's resurrection. He was crucified on Good Friday. He rested in the grave until the third day thereafter, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and he rose from the dead. And in rising from the dead, he has brought renewal to all creation. He has brought a new way of being and of living and existing, renewal to our human nature. And so this is why the early Christians gathered together on that day, on Sunday, the first day of the new life. But of course, we live in a Judeo-Christian society, one that has been marked not only by Christian faith, but also by our Jewish ancestry. And so isn't it beautiful that we have a weekend, which is not just one day of rest, but that Saturday has also been marked as a day in which we can step back from all the work that we do, maybe take care of a few of those extra chores that we have, so that then we also have that freedom on Sunday to live differently than the world around us. To not just use it as another day to get things done, to go to those sports games, to get the kids ready for the week of school, whatever it might be. That we have the opportunity, living in this time, to be able to have not only a day to get caught up on Saturday, but also a day to stop and to rest. And we need, I think, in a greater way, if we are going to reclaim our culture, our church, our faith, the mandate of carrying on and living our faith for generations that are to come, to reclaim Sunday. We as a Christian people should not be shopping. I even avoid online Amazon scrolling on Sunday. I make sure that my delivery box of food is delivered on Monday, not on Sunday, because I don't want other people to work. We need to say this day is different than all others. And that it is not only a divine mandate, but it has been the practice of Christians through the ages to live this in a way that is uniquely our own. Okay, so that's a lot on the Sabbath, but I hope it gives some context for why we gather together and the importance that it is to be renewed and to have this experience together. The second question that was sent to me was, what about the Jubilee? And are we going to hear anything about this Jubilee year? I said earlier that Jubilee comes from the Jewish tradition in the book of Leviticus, in which the people are mandated on the 49th year into the 50th year to have a year of rest, a year in which they would return to their ancestral home, in which they would forgive their debtors, in which they would set slaves free. That all things sort of were to hit the big reset button in life and in culture, because it is so easy to fall into the trap of getting a few extra things done on that day of rest. It is so easy to become caught up with the ways of our world and our life, that the Jubilee was meant to be a regular reminder for the Jewish people to live differently, even if they had been struggling to do so. And this idea of Jubilee has been taken up at various moments in church history and through the centuries as something for us as well. Because we know the tendency is to slip into the culture of our times and of our world. And so the church has called for various Jubilee years, ordinarily happening every 49th, 50th year. You might remember the great Jubilee of the year 2000, the new millennium, and all the lead up and programs that were part of that. Even just a few years ago, Pope Francis called for an extraordinary Jubilee year, which was the year of mercy in 2015, knowing in his heart as Holy Father, this is something so important for us and for our world to experience. I'm told there's another Jubilee that's going to come in 2033, which is going to be the Jubilee of our salvation. That is 2,000 years since Christ's death and resurrection. And so the church has been a little more liberal about the use of Jubilee years. This year, 2025, our Holy Father has called for what he calls the Jubilee year of hope. Hope. Such an important virtue, a theological virtue, a gift that is from God. Of course, something that is given to us not just as a community, but as individuals. And perhaps that's why I've not spoken yet so much on the Jubilee, because it is not just meant to be something I preach about. It's not something I just talk about till I'm blue in the face and tell you this is really important, you have to do this, get going. It is about our own desire to perhaps have that stepping back. Our own desire to say, maybe I need to do things differently than I've been doing them the past years. Where are those areas in my life in which I need to be set free from slavery, or in which I need to free someone from slavery? Where are those areas in my life in which I need to return to my home, to the promised land, as the people of Israel were accompanied to that place themselves? Where is it that I need to set debtors free? This is the reflection that we are invited to as we begin this Jubilee year of hope. Knowing it is an individual journey as much as it is a communal journey, the Diocese of Hamilton has prepared this prayer booklet for parishes throughout our diocese to think about the Jubilee individually, to think about what this means in my life. How can I enter into it? How can I participate in the Jubilee year? Unfortunately, I think there's such great demand from this homily for this Jubilee year prayer booklet that they are all gone. I'm sorry. But you can go to the Diocese of Hamilton website. You can go to our website and find links for that Jubilee year prayer booklet in different ways that you might enter into it yourself. Just a word about Jubilee, tying it once again into our readings this weekend. We read our first reading from the 62nd chapter of Isaiah's writings. And Isaiah is actually proclaiming in that 62nd chapter that the Jubilee year that was announced in the 61st chapter was not meant to be something that was just for the people of Israel. That he says, you will become a sign for all the nations. By entering into this Jubilee, by celebrating, by being different than the world around you, you will proclaim to all the nations that there is a God, one that has come to his people and joined them to himself as a bride and a groom are joined together in marriage. This is the closeness of God's desire to be in relationship with you and with all creation. Well, we set out, even as we've gathered together, for this to be a more effective sign for our world today, to be credible witnesses of the gospel by living, perhaps very simply, just in the ordinary rhythms that we know have been entrusted to us through our Judeo-Christian heritage. What a gift it is to have this rhythm, to have this renewal. I want to say a final word just before moving on, and that is that we celebrate a baptism today at our Mass. A little one, Gemma, was to be received new life from God through these waters of baptism that have been given to us. Gemma was only born 8 days ago. And I know her parents would have loved to have her baptized on day 1 or day 2 or day 3 or day 4. But how beautiful it is in the rhythm of our Christian lives that she is baptized on this 8th day, this day of the recreation of all things that has been made possible by the Christ event, by our experience that we share as a Christian people. May that same renewal take hold in us as we gather together on this Sabbath day of rest. May that same renewal take root in our lives as we celebrate this Jubilee year of hope. And may that gift of new life be with Gemma and with her family as we celebrate this great gift of our faith that has been handed on to us and which we are renewed and transformed.